With Bridgerton season 4 fast approaching, we only have 5 more months to the end of the year, you all, which means January 2026 will soon be here and we'll be back amidst the ton. But as I was saying, with Bridgerton season 4 fast approaching, my mind has been going back to old characters to figure out how prominent a role they would have in the new season amidst the introduction of new characters and the ever expanding plot that is the Bridgerton kids finding love. I mean, with Penelope Featherington and Colin Bridgerton well matched and having their happy ever after, there really isn't much need for much with regards, say, Portia Featherington, right? The other parents of lead characters, as long as their offspring are taking a turn around the plot that is their Bridgerton season, often faded away into the background. Unless they are the iconic Lady Danbury, who still has to introduce us to her nephew Garrett. If we ever get that season, of course. And of course, Lady Violet Bridgerton doesn't count because she still has 5 more kids looking for love. The parents of the other love interests, however, have all faded slowly into the edges of the story. Except Portia Featherington, who we are still getting more of in the upcoming season. And whilst I know that part of that is because she's played by the utterly fabulous Polly Walker, who deserves all the screen time and more, I do think it's more than that. Because even though a lot of fans' frustrations as it pertains to the show is often focused on its bloated cast and the fact that it always has a gazillion story beats all happening at the same time, which doesn't give us, as the audience, enough time to focus on and fully appreciate the Bridgerton romance that is meant to be central to each season, I do think that when those secondary plot points tie back to the story that has been told or the one we're currently experiencing, then it works. And this is especially true in the case for Portia Featherington, who I feel has a very important role to play in the upcoming season. 3, as a matter of fact. The first is that the season's meant to explore her relationship with Penelope. The second is her having set the scene for the crossing over between the heads of the households and those who serve them. And the third is to serve as a juxtaposition to Araminta and her treatment of her ward Sophie, which in turn is a vindication for Portia Featherington. Before I dive right in, I would just like to say a big thank you to everyone who sent me get well wishes in the past week whilst I was recovering from that horrible stomach bug. Your care and concern is much appreciated. Your girl is feeling much better now, as you can tell. What? Now back to what I was saying, and please note that these are just my personal thoughts and opinions, of course. The reason why Portia Featherington is still very much present in season 4 is because I think she has a pretty prominent role to play and will be vindicated. And we'll start first with the very first one, which is her relationship with Penelope. Because yes, I have seen the tweets, the articles, and the posts of viewers who are pretty frustrated that Bridgerton season 3 seemed to gloss over Portia's character growth and waved a magic wand to help mend her relationship with Pen at an incredible pace. And whilst I can understand why a ton of viewers are frustrated about that, I think a lot of them ignore the fact that it is clear that Bridgerton also agrees with them. In fact, one could say that it was done purposefully to push the narrative role that Portia Featherington is to serve in season 4. Mother to a married daughter whose husband marries into the family and whose son is the heir to the title, the estate, and the townhouse. The previous couples that came before Pauline, i.e. Saphne, Anthony, and even Georgette, all had the daughters marrying out. Daphne marries Simon and leaves her home to become the Duchess of Hastings. Kate leaves her family when she marries Anthony and becomes the Viscountess Bridgerton. Colin has no title, yeah, but is married to Penelope, and the birth of their son means that he becomes the father of the next Baron Featherington, which also means that as the one to inherit the title, Colin and Penelope's child will thus be inheriting the townhouse, which means that ultimately Portia, Mrs. Varley, and the rest of the servants will thus be reliant on the grace of Pen, Colin, and their son. And I think that that is a great situation within which the characters, particularly Pen and Portia, will get the chance to hash things out completely and mend their relationship. Now, before you say, but Noria, there's no need for that to happen. Portia does talk to Penelope, and Pen confesses to the ton that she's Lady Whistledown. The air between them is clear. I would say yes and no. Because the thing that does have a lot of viewers upset, and I can see why they are, is the fact that there was too drastic a change in her relationship with Pen in too short a time, which ended up making her redemption arc not feel earned. Now, I don't mind that actually. Maybe it's because I've always been a Portia girly and I understand where she was coming from. But I also know that whilst we as the audience do have a more omnipresent view of things, which is coloring how we are judging a lot of these characters, I myself am guilty of that. I know that just because I am aware of why Portia was driven to act the way she's done all these years, doesn't mean that Penelope is. And that's something that I think the fourth season will most likely focus its attention on with regards to Portia. Because with all three of her daughters married, their future secured, and their home not in danger of being taken away, this time around, we get to see a Portia who can finally let go of the burdens and expectations that have driven her thus far and show a face to Pen that her daughter has never had the chance to see. The face of a mother who isn't constantly hanging by a thread, terrified that her daughters will not be able to secure a good match. I've seen people complain that Portia's excitement about Pen being with Colin is only because he's a Bridgerton, and to that I say, yeah, so? There's really no family in the ton, except for maybe the royal family and those who have a dukedom to their name, who wouldn't be absolutely delighted to marry into the Bridgerton family. I already have a video highlighting why I think everyone wants a Bridgerton, and I would leave the link to it in the description box if you want to see it. But yeah, the Bridgertons are a good match. She's delighted about that. But she's also even happier than that because she would never have dreamed that Pen would have secured such a good match. And now that the daughter that's giving her the most concern because she's the most like her and the most unlike her in equal measure is happily married and a mother in her own right, Portia gets to show us, the audience, what an unburdened Portia Featherington looks like. And that is a good thing. But like I said, the reason why Portia still has a prominent role to play in season 4 isn't just because of her relationship with Penelope and how we are going to see her slowly earn her daughter and the audience's forgiveness and acceptance. It's also because season 4 is a season that is going to lean heavily into the class structures and systems that run underneath the fancy balls and gowns and halls and pairings that we've always gotten in Bridgerton. Because like I've said often in the past, the Penelope is the only Bridgerton story that attempts to tackle the class structure and status and what impacts the difference in them could have on a forbidden romance like Penelope. It's meant to be a tearing down of the walls that have separated members of the landed gentry and those who serve them. And to that, there has to be a crossing of lines. And sure, Benedict and Sophie are a take into the extremes of their own story, although not really if you've read the books, but Portia and Mrs. Varley set the stage ever since the very first season. I know I'm not trying to imply that there was some sort of sexual or romantic relationship between Portia and Mrs. Varley, although now that I think about it, they scheme well together. She understands her like no other, and when they had to let go of practically all the Featherington servants, Mrs. Varley was one of the few that Portia kept. So, could there be? No, I'm just joking. But anyway, back to the point I was trying to make. Of all the maids, housekeepers, men servants, and butlers that we've been introduced to in the show, so far, none of them have quite the screen time importance or quasi-agency as Mrs. Varley. And no, not even Mrs. Wilson can be equated to her, even though she is the Bridgerton's housekeeper. And that's because even in her interactions with the rest of the Bridgertons, there is a degree of separation between Mrs. Wilson and her employers. Mrs. Varley, however, acts more like a co-conspirator with Portia. And no, I'm not implying that there was any equality between Portia and Mrs. Varley. Clearly, the latter is a servant and Portia is her employer, and that is a class difference that wouldn't change. However, with Varley, we're able to see a bit further into the head of someone who, based on their class and the type of show Bridgerton is, we ideally should not. I don't think anyone can make the argument that Varley isn't loyal to a fault, that she doesn't love the Featherington girls, that she wasn't proud of Pen after Pen gave her the money to throw her sisters a ball. For someone who belongs to a class that is often ignored and invisible to those around them, Portia's relationship with Varley very much puts Varley in the spotlight where she gets to shine. And for me, it shows clearly how richer the relationship can be once class divides are crossed, whether it is for the sake of friendship or love. And considering that that is going to be Benedict and Sophie's story in the 4th season, it just makes sense that whilst we get to see that play out on a grander scale with them, there will be echoes of it with Portia and Varley in their own world or corner. Because pulling back the curtains between the classes to see how the other half lives also gives us the chance to see how they perceive those who are their masters. And if we're going to be getting that view, then there's absolutely no way Portia and Varley's relationship wouldn't also feature a bit in that regards in the upcoming season. And finally, there's the juxtaposition between her and Araminta Gunn's treatment of Sophie. And before you tell me, but girl, Portia didn't have a stepdaughter, quit reaching Noria, might I remind you of Miss Marina Thompson, now Lady Crane. Sophie is as much a ward to Araminta as Marina is to Portia. One is a young girl that Araminta is saddled with after she marries her widower husband, and the other is a young woman that Portia is saddled with thanks to her husband's debts. And yet, as much as people tend to find Portia's treatment of Marina appalling, I'm pretty sure we can all collectively agree that even though she was jealous of Marina's beauty taking the shine away from her daughters, she didn't treat her horribly until the discovery was made that Marina was pregnant under her roof, threatening her daughters' futures and their marriages. And even the treatment, other than the slapping bit, I could see why she was treating Marina that way. Society is terrible to unmarried pregnant women, and even more so to the young girls who share the same roof with said women and whose virtues would be judged in the exact same way. Regency England, remember. So I understood why she thought the only solution that Marina had was to marry quickly to someone who wouldn't mind her passing off their child onto them. I would never judge or blame Portia based off of more modern sensibilities because I recognized what she was working with. And in her own way, she was trying to help Marina. You might not agree with me, but that's how I see it. And I think Portia and Marina's relationship is a great way to juxtapose Araminta and Sophie's relationship. She showed the care that can and should be given to your ward, who you're responsible for, even if you don't like them. For me, having Portia be present in the 4th season, which is meant to highlight the many ways in which Araminta wrongs Sophie and the humiliation that she rains on her, is meant to be a vindication for Portia as well. Like, no, I don't think that the showrunners thought, hey, so many people thought that Portia was absolutely horrid to Marina in the 1st season. Why don't we show them what horrid looks like when someone who's meant to care for their ward absolutely maltreats them? That will be vindication for Portia for sure. Like, clearly not. The book was written ages ago. But it doesn't mean that I can't read it that way. Because a small part of the season is meant to be focused on Portia's redemption and her being fully accepted by her daughter. Part of that stain that needs to be wiped off of her would be in her treatment of Marina when the latter was her ward. And I don't know about you, but what better way to show that Portia Featherington might be harsh, might be petty, and a tad bit opportunistic, but she is a goddess compared to the absolute trash that is Araminta gone than having her be present in the same season as Araminta's introduction for some good old comparison. But hey, that's just me and my thoughts. I would, as always, love to hear yours. Please drop them down in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share it if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. And until tomorrow's video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.